Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining another Bosnian Advocacy Center's panel discussion, this time with great friends of Bosnia from the United States, Senator Denis DeConcini and Senator Joe Lieberman. We are incredibly honored that we'll be able to hear some of the fascinating stories about senators' advocacy during our country's most difficult years, but also to hear some of their prospects and opinions for the path ahead. There's certainly a lot to hear and learn from the senators, and without further ado, I will leave the stage to our moderator, Yasmin Mujanovic, to start the discussion. Thank you very much for joining us, and enjoy.
Can't hear you. You're muted.
Apologies. Technical difficulties right off the get-go. Always a good sign. So thank you very much to Ismail and the Bosnian Advocacy Center for hosting us here today. And of course, to our two distinguished senators and guests here today, Senator Lieberman and Senator DeConcini. I'm going to briefly read their biographies just so that we're all on the same page. I know we have a slightly younger audience, so they might not be as familiar with the senators as they should be. And then we're going to launch into a couple questions and a kind of little bit of a retrospective discussion about their involvement during the Bosnian War. Senator Joe Lieberman is an American attorney and politician who was a longtime member of the U.S. Senate, serving from 1989 until 2013. In 2000, he was chosen by Al Gore to be his Democratic vice presidential nominee, and also became the first Jewish candidate on a major presidential ticket as such. Senator Lieberman was a vehement supporter of Bosnia-Herzegovina during the War of Aggression and Genocide in the 1990s, and he co-sponsored multiple legislative proposals that aimed at ending the arms embargo against Bosnia and supporting Bosnia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So welcome to Senator Lieberman. Senator Denis DeConcini is an American politician and former Democratic senator from Arizona. He served in the U.S. Senate from 1977 until 1995. He was a member of and chair of several critical Senate committees and commissions. Senator DeConcini chaired the highly influential Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, also known as the Helsinki Commission, which provided a platform for key Bosnian officials during the war, as well as civilians, to speak before Congress. Senator DeConcini introduced and co-sponsored numerous legislative proposals concerning Bosnia all the way up until the end of his Senate career. Welcome to Senator DeConcini as well, and thank you to you both once again. So I'm just going to launch right into it, if I may. We've titled this event, and you have both been referred to in the past as so-called quote-unquote Bosnia hawks. And that's, of course, a title that was also extended to folks like Senator Bob Dole, the late Representative Frank Mikulski, and, of course, the current President Joe Biden. Senator Lieberman, I'd like to begin with you, if I may. Could you talk us through some of your early experiences with the Bosnian issue in the early 90s, and why you feel that the war in Bosnia moved you and so many of your colleagues to become involved on behalf of the people of Bosnia at pretty significant political cost and risk to you, if I may say so?
Thank you. I'm glad to answer the question. I look back on this period of work with my dear friend and colleague Denis DeConcini, Bob Dole, Joe Biden, and others, with a real sense of privilege that we had the opportunity to do what we did. And thanks to you and the Bosnian Advocacy Center for your continuing work on behalf of Bosnia. It's an honor to be with you today. So I'll set the historic context and also to some extent a personal context as to explain why I got so involved in the effort in Congress to give aid to the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina. The first was that we were this conflict with the Soviet Union, communism, freedom, capitalism, ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union. And it was a remarkable time, and we debated a lot. We offered aid to various countries of the former Soviet Union and Central and Eastern Europe. But what happened in the Balkans, it happened because of Serbian aggression and ultimately genocide, was a challenge, I certainly thought, to the post-Cold War Europe, where the Europeans and we who had fought the Soviets going to sit back now that the Soviet allied dictators were removed and let ethnic or national conflicts continue turmoil in Europe. And of course, we felt that we had to act to preserve the stability that came in post-war Europe. And we can come back to this, Doctor, but what was really troubling was that the Europeans themselves didn't seem to want to act until they were really pushed by horrific events, genocidal events on the ground in Bosnia-Herzegovina, because I think they were so happy that the Cold War was over. To a certain extent, the Europeans wanted a vacation from history, but history doesn't guarantee vacations. And what was happening in Bosnia required us to be involved, not to be passive. The second reason I got involved, I think, was personal, and I'll be personal about it. I'm Jewish, but you don't have to be Jewish to look back on World War II and the Holocaust to have joined in the post-World War II promise never again. And of course, when you say never again, it doesn't just mean never again will Jews be tortured and victims of genocide as they were in World War II with others. But we can't sit back and watch any group be victims of genocide in the same way. In this case, of course, it happened to be mostly Muslims in Bosnia. And I felt we had a moral and historic obligation to act. So that's an introduction. As we used to say in the Senate, I'll yield to Senator DeConcini, but I would say one other thing. We fought very hard for the U.S. to get involved in this, to stop the Serbian aggression and genocide. We fought during the Bush 41 administration without success. We fought during the Clinton administration. It took a while to get President Clinton to act, but the most important thing, though we were a minority that ultimately became a majority in Congress, the minority was profoundly bipartisan. Dole and McCain, Republicans, Dennis and me and Biden, Democrats, leading the charge. And I look back on it with a real sense of pride and almost nostalgia, because you don't see that much in Congress these days.
Right. Thank you so much. I mean, there's a lot that you've already said there, the importance of bipartisanship, but also thank you so much for really immediately bringing up the role of the Holocaust and the memory of the Holocaust. And I think for many Bosnians and Bosnian Americans, the key role of the Jewish American community in raising the alarm about what was going on in Bosnia was so important, and something that is remembered with great fondness and appreciation. Senator DeConcini, I want to turn to you. And in preparation for this event, I was reading an article of yours in the Christian Science Monitor from June of 1993. And to Senator Lieberman's point, in that article, you were very critical of the then European community. And you write at one point, and I'm quoting here, that there was a failure to respond effectively and decisively to wanton aggression and genocide by the then Milosevic regime. Why were you so confident already in 1993 in referring to the events in Bosnia as genocide? And I want to ask you specifically, did you receive and how did you deal with the pushback that I imagine you must have received from perhaps some of your colleagues on the Hill or even members of the Clinton administration and certainly your European counterparts?
Well, Dr. thank my friend Joe Lieberman for his background, because he laid it out so well for us here. And I got involved because when I came to the Senate in 1977, a couple of senators, including Russell Long and maybe Bob Dole, because he was served on the Judiciary Committee. They recommended that I get on the Helsinki Commission, which I did. Doing that alerted me immediately to human rights violation. That was when, as Senator Lieberman pointed out, the Soviet Union was still in existence and persecuting particularly Jews. I went to the Soviet Union a number of times, and with the Helsinki Commission, and just as on the Codel with senators. And every time we went, excuse me, we would go and visit the so-called refuseniks, the Jewish community in Arizona, but also nationally, was just fantastic about the information they had on these people, where they were, and how to contact them. And we would go out after our official dinner or go into the opera or whatever it was. We would get a car from the embassy and we'd go see these people. And the stories they told were just embedded in me. And when I saw in 91, clearly, even before that, what was happening in Bosnia after the Soviet Union collapsed, it was just shocking. And being on the Helsinki Commission, we used to go to the Eastern European countries and try to influence the Soviet Union, which we couldn't, about having democratic principles and elections and standing up for human rights and what have you. And so that's how I got into this. And it's something that's moved me. I didn't have any pushback except from President Bush and President Clinton, the regime presidency. They just did not want to get involved in the thing. And just to demonstrate, I always have trouble pronouncing the name, but Bosnia President Izetbegovic, he called me in 1992. And I was chairman of the Helsinki Committee then, and he asked if I would contact George Shultz, the secretary, and see if he could get contact with the president and encourage him to do something, because at that time, when he called me, the Serbian forces were amazing on the border and for an imminent invasion, which they did, and he was fearful of that. I called Secretary Shultz, and he was very nice, and he was a wonderful man to work with. And even though we were different parties, he was never partisan with me. But he just didn't show a lot of enthusiasm about it. And so I just got myself and the Helsinki Commission more and more committed to do something about it. And that's when we started doing hearings and traveling there. I traveled there 3 times and met with Milosevic and Karadzic and urged them to not do what they were doing. And then when the invasion came, it was just absolutely genocide, as Senator Lieberman pointed out. And towards the Muslim, I think the population there, Bosnia, Croatia, was about 40% Muslim. So there was a lot of Muslims that they were going to take after, and they did. And the horrendous stories that I heard from people that were tortured and women who were raped, because under the Muslim society, if a woman is raped or sexually assaulted, she's not accepted back in the family. And so it was hard to believe in today's or those days that could happen. So that's how I got into it. And once you get into these things, as Senator Lieberman pointed out, you really get committed. You think you have an opportunity to maybe make a little bit of a change for somebody. And that's one of the things that senators can do. And that's why I got into it. And I'm grateful that for the Bosnian Advocacy Center to be here today, because I haven't thought about this a lot. I read about it a little bit, and I see that Bosnia has applied and complied with the first steps to get into NATO. And that certainly, that certainly is a positive thing if that can take place. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Senator, very much. And you've brought up 2 really significant points. I mean, you're again raising the issue of the memory of the atrocities and the genocide that took place in Bosnia. And you raised the issue of wartime sexual violence, which is, of course, an ongoing issue that we're dealing with, the consequences of that in Bosnia. And of course, you've raised the hugely critical issue of NATO membership for Bosnia, which we're going to discuss in a few minutes a little bit more. Senator Lieberman, I want to turn back to you, and you've already mentioned Senator Bob Dole, the great Senator Bob Dole, someone that you worked with very closely during your time in the Senate, and specifically on the issue of lifting the arms embargo against the Bosnian government during the war. Again, I'm really curious to hear a little bit about how these efforts took place, and again, why you, as a then Democratic senator, you felt so compelled to work with a Republican colleague to challenge the foreign policy during the Clinton administration of a Democratic president. I mean, again, a very, very significant political move on your part. So talk to us about that, if you can, please.
Thanks. I mean, Bob Dole and I got to know each other with regard to foreign policy really well in 1990 and 1991, around the contest, the debate in Congress about whether we should authorize President Bush 41 to take action to push Saddam Hussein's military out of Kuwait, which it had invaded in August of 1990. And that was my second and third year in the Senate, but most Democrats were opposed to giving President Bush that authority. Bob Dole was a majority leader. I spoke out in favor of doing that, and we developed a friendship and a kind of trusting relationship that continued on into the conflict in the Balkans, and particularly in Bosnia. I mean, I would say, when I came to the Senate, one of the role models that I had in my mind was the extraordinary relationship after the Second World War between the Republican senator from Michigan, who was the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Democratic president, and Arthur Vandenberg and Harry Truman. And Vandenberg had actually been an isolationist in the 30s, but he said, if you're a realist after Pearl Harbor, you're no longer an isolationist. So he and Truman worked wonderfully together to create all the post-war, really pretty much all the post-war global institutions that secured the peace and prosperity, including NATO. And I think Bob Dole was sort of the personification of Vandenberg at that time, because he took up the battle for Bosnia and the people of Bosnia against the Serbian aggression while George Bush was president. And when Bush lost to Clinton, and now the Democrats like Dennis DeConcini and me were facing a president of our own party, the model that Dole set during the Bush time was one that strengthened us in sticking to principle about what to do in Bosnia, even though at first President Clinton refused to go along with us. I will say, for the historical record, that what Dole and I and Dennis and others were trying to do was to lift the arms embargo, that is the prohibition against sending arms to anyone in the Balkans, so that we could help the fighters in Bosnia to defend themselves against the Serbian much better supplied and equipped Serbs who were attacking them, and that we developed a policy: lift the embargo and strike Serbian aggressors from the air, lift and strike. And we did that because we knew that the American people were not ready to put troops on the ground in the Balkans. President Clinton actually, as a candidate in 1992, endorsed lift and strike. When he got elected, we talked to him, and he said, I'm going to stick with it. And he sent Warren Christopher, the Secretary of State, to Europe to talk to our allies about implementing this lift and strike policy in 1993. And the Europeans said to Christopher, who reported back to the president, we can't support you. They came up with, I thought, a very unconvincing and really, in some ways, disgraceful excuse, which is they had humanitarian workers on the ground trying to help the people of Bosnia. If we sent arms to the Bosnians and struck from the air, those European humanitarian workers would be in danger. But what about the people of Bosnia, Herzegovina, who were being tortured and murdered increasingly every day? So Clinton held back as a result of that. And we were very disappointed, but our, I guess Shakespeare might say, our band of brothers, bipartisan, said this is too important for all the reasons Dennis DeConcini and I have said. We're going to stick with this until we get the U.S. and our European allies to act. And Dole was a critical figure in that, in a very bipartisan way. And ultimately, we were successful, not just because of our advocacy, but because the American media began to focus on the real life horrors that were happening on the ground in Bosnia. And ultimately, of course, I mean, even when that happened, we passed one resolution to lift the arms embargo under certain circumstances. And President Clinton vetoed it. Oh, we were heartbroken and angry, frankly. But then the worst happened on the ground, as we all know, and there was this massacre at Srebrenica, where thousands of Bosnians were shot and pushed into graves. If I may say so, it was unfortunately a kind of repeat of what happened in 1941. I believe it was September, at a place called Babi Yar, which is a ravine on the outskirts of Kyiv, Ukraine, where the Nazis and their allies marched, I think, over 30,000 Ukrainian Jews to this ravine, and over the next 2 days just shot them in the head and buried them. And that's exactly what happened, 5,000 or 6,000, I believe, at Srebrenica. Well, the American people were outraged, people of Europe were outraged. And finally, President Clinton and our European allies acted, and that ultimately led to Dayton, where Ambassador Holbrooke, representing President Clinton, was able to negotiate the agreement that at least established peace. And we're still working on how to make it fully operable, but at least it ended the genocide and the aggression, and set up the process to remove the evildoers in Serbia from their positions of power.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. A very detailed answer, and I'm really intrigued. And it makes a lot of sense to me that notion that you raise of Senator Dole kind of setting a precedent, providing an example during his tenure with a Republican administration, and that then giving you and your Democratic colleagues the capacity to then work on a more challenging fashion against the Democratic president. I think that's really, really very interesting. To that point, also, there's some similar issues here. I want to loop back to you, Senator DeConcini. You were obviously a hugely pivotal figure on the Helsinki Commission, and again, I want to kind of bring back a specific incident in 1992, in May of 1992, you at that time you invited and you hosted a gentleman by the name of Haris Silajdžić, who was the then foreign minister of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and you asked him during the proceedings in May 1992 whether Mr. Silajdžić believed that some of the support that Bosnia was receiving at the time from likewise newly independent Croatia, whether that was perhaps not somewhat duplicitous, and whether or not the then Croatian government also had ambitions of its own and designs of its own on Bosnia and Herzegovina and Bosnian territory. And of course, by October of 1992, we saw precisely that play out, where there was a kind of de facto invasion launched by the then government of Croatia into Bosnia. And I'm so struck by this moment, because this is happening simultaneously as many folks, especially the Europeans, but also some folks in the United States, are saying, we can't make heads or tails of this thing in Bosnia or in the former Yugoslavia. So how is it that you were able to deliver this kind of remarkably prescient analysis of a conflict that so many people were just kind of like over their heads by?
Well, thank you. The hearings that we held in the Helsinki Commission were just dramatic, as I mentioned, and also I was on the Intelligence Committee and became chairman in '93, and I was very active on that. And the information we were getting was, though some classified, it was just horrendous, as Senator Lieberman pointed out. It's just more than you could accept. And as it got into the press, as Senator Lieberman pointed, the American people rose up. Bob Dole and Senator Lieberman, they led that charge. And then when I became chairman of the committee with my ranking member, John Warner from Virginia, wonderful man, he and I, along with Senator Lieberman and Dole and Biden and several others, I think Christopher Smith was with us, or
Right.
Steny Hoyer, we went down and we talked and met with President Clinton, urging him to get involved. He resisted, and eventually it got so bad, as Senator Lieberman points out so well, that the American people were finally putting the pressure on, not just us. But to speak a moment about Dole, he was an exceptional individual, because, as you pointed out, he took on the Bush administration on the issue. It was a lot easier for me, at least, and maybe Lieberman also, to take on the Bush administration than it was to take on the Clinton administration that just came in. But this was such an issue of genocide and what was occurring that was just unacceptable. I made a number of contacts with the NATO, trying to get them involved, and they just resisted. The Helsinki Commission did. We had hearings, we had witnesses, and we called them, we met with them, we went to the Atlantic Treaty Association meetings a couple of times. I got a chance to speak there, just at the early stage, to no avail. And I think Senator Lieberman points it out that finally enough of it got into the public, and the American people, finally realized what was going on, and this was similar to the Holocaust, and this could happen in other places. And so, finally, the Dayton Accord, it finally came around in 1995, the year after I left. And though it's anything but not even close to being perfect because of the tripartite and the problems they have there, but at least, as Senator Lieberman pointed out, it brought the end of the war and peace in that sense. And now it's important that we don't forget about this. We don't just say, okay, the Dayton Accord in 1995, it's all over. We can go, worry about Myanmar or some other place like that if we want to involve ourselves with human rights. We got to stay focused here. And I've talked to Deputy Secretary Sullivan in the State Department, and I had somebody made contact for me, and they were very, very committed to it. And I can't speak, and I wouldn't try to speak for President Biden, but I think he still is committed to this and will pursue it in due time. He's got a few things on his platter right away in front of that, but I think he really will.
Absolutely.
I'd like to just say a
Please.
word, and really it's a thank you to Senator DeConcini for what he did through the Helsinki Commission. And it's a little bit of a lesson in the different kinds of governmental power. When our group, the bipartisan group, Dole, Biden, DeConcini, myself, McCain, we knew that we didn't have the votes, unfortunately, to get the government to do what we wanted them to do. But we had our voices. We had the ability to continue to introduce legislation, resolutions, and we had people like Dennis DeConcini, who had the Helsinki Commission, who could hold the hearings held, and those influenced public opinion in the United States and made it harder for the administration, in that case the Clinton administration, to remain passive in the face of the terrible things that were happening in Bosnia. So I wanted to say that to thank Dennis for his leadership role, courageous really, but also to suggest that even if you're in Congress and other parliamentary bodies, you don't have the votes. You have what we used to call in America the bully pulpit. You have the pulpit from which to speak to your constituents and to try to convince them that something they don't seem to want to do, really, they should do, because it's the right thing to do and it's in their interest. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. He pointed out so well, Doctor, that that truly is how it happened, and thank you for the compliments. But you know, you and Bob Dole led the charge there, and I'm like you to see Bob Dole as majority leader stand up to president of his own party was really remarkable. Talk about courage and leadership. That's it. And a lot of us stood up too, but we weren't majority leader. When you're majority leader, you're expected not to be that, take the position, but he did.
That's right. I'm really, I have to say, I'm really moved by this discussion. And one of the things that we wanted to have happen with this event was, in particular for younger folks and younger Bosnian Americans in particular, to hear about these experiences and these events from the key figures who were there, because I think it's so important for the challenges that remain, not just in Bosnia, but in the entire region. And exactly to that point, you've both really set up this transition very beautifully for me. And I want to ask a couple of questions about some of these contemporary issues. And I'm going to pose this to both of you, though I'd like to start, if I may, with you, Senator Lieberman. So, you've just noted the Dayton Peace Accords. We just observed the 25th anniversary of that landmark agreement. And now the big issue today, as we're kind of looking down into the 2020s, clearly far and away the biggest foreign policy issue for the government in Sarajevo remains its Atlantic aspirations, its aspirations for NATO membership. Can you talk to us a little bit, as someone who was such a highly influential political figure, a U.S. senator, a key U.S. senator, what do you want to hear? What do you want to see? And what do you feel the American public needs to see and hear from contemporary Bosnian leaders and activists, how they can make legible the necessity and urgency of Atlantic membership for this very, very strategically located polity in Southeastern Europe?
Thanks. That's a really important question. And, you've said a few times, and Ismail also did, how important it is to have discussions like this so that Bosnians and Bosnian Americans who remember all the details of what happened in the 90s are. The truth is that the American people need to be reminded too, and that's something that American leaders can and should do. Fortunately, the president now, President Biden, is somebody who has the memories of Bosnia and the war in the 90s very much in his head and heart. Also Kosovo and the ongoing conflict between Serbia and Kosovo. And as you probably know, the president's son, Beau Biden, served for a period of time in Kosovo. So I think that the first thing that the leaders of Bosnia and Herzegovina should do in terms of pursuing membership in NATO, which I think is very important to achieve, is to work with friends in America to remind members of Congress and the American people, but begin with members of Congress about, you might say, the investment that America made in Bosnia or Herzegovina to give it the opportunity to be an independent country allied with us. And then to go to the strategic situation now, where in the region, democratic forces have been under challenge, including particularly in Serbia. And the reality is that our global big power challengers, Russia and China, continue to be involved. Well, I'll put it another way. Russia has had a historic interest, almost I'd say an appetite for influence in the Balkans, and has continued to try to exercise its power there. But a really new factor, certainly since the 90s, is that China, and there's a great focus on China in the U.S. now, and the challenge that they represent to America. China is moving out in various countries of the Balkans with money and arms and the Belt and Road Initiative and all the rest. So what I want to say is that this fight over adding countries of the former Soviet Union, but campaign, let's call it, after the collapse of the Cold War was very important to a lot of us. And we acted pretty quickly, certainly for the countries like Poland and Czech Republic and Hungary, and then the Baltics. But now this is unfinished business, and we did it because they were free, and we had an obligation to help them to remain free. And one of the worries was what Russia would like to do to them if they were not within the umbrella of NATO. The same is true of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And NATO has specific requirements for membership, but I think Bosnia is on the way to realizing those. So that's another whole initiative that Bosnia has to make the case based on its own governance and economy that it qualifies. But in America, people have to be reminded of why Bosnia in NATO is as important to us today as it was to get the other countries of the former Soviet Union into NATO pretty quickly in the 1990s.
Thank you very much. That's very, very useful and very instructive, and I think very important for a lot of Bosnian leaders and activists to hear. Senator DeConcini, I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on this question as well. Again, what do you feel like American leaders and the American public need to hear from the Bosnian side? Why is this NATO issue so important?
Well, as Senator Lieberman pointed out, it is crucial. And it's, to me, so important because Northern Macedonia is already part of NATO. And so this is the only part of the Baltics that is not. And it's crucial for the security of to me, the Western world, because we don't know for sure where Russia is going in the long term. And we'd like to think it's not that serious, but, Russia has already spoken out. They're opposed to them joining NATO. And one of the presidents there has been kind of reluctant to move forward. I think it's crucial that the United States step up and play a major role with NATO, influencing NATO to move ahead. Unfortunately, the previous president had such a horrible relationship with NATO and did not see our benefit, which is absurd in my opinion. But we have a different president that is very astute in foreign policy, having been chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and knowing all these leaders long before he became president. I think what would be helpful is that if this advocacy center and anybody else can do to get members of Congress to urge President Biden and the Secretary of State to move and present more, I hate to use the word, but pressure, but arguments in justification for getting Bosnia into NATO soon. They've almost qualified from what I understand. In Croatia, there's a little bit of problem, or Serbia has a little bit of problem. They haven't turned over all the military bases, I'm told, that they're supposed to do. Where in Bosnia, they've turned over more than half of them and made them accessible. So this is just absolutely important. And it's important because it's going to stabilize Western and Eastern Europe, which is just absolutely the key, in my judgment, to preventing another war in Europe. We just don't need that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really terrific and important answers from from both of the senators here, raising a lot of important issues. I think we've gotten a nice regional perspective. Senator Lieberman brought up unfinished business in Kosovo, which we're all very concerned about, and we want to help our Kosovar friends there as well. And of course, Senator DeConcini raising very important the recent success, North Macedonia becoming the 30th member of NATO, hugely significant for the entire region. Senator Lieberman, I want to turn to you again as we're kind of wrapping up here a little bit, and you've already spoken a little bit about Russia, you've spoken about China, their growing influence and designs in Southeastern Europe, in Eastern Europe as a whole. And now we're seeing, in particular, Russia reemerging as this kind of patron of some of the Serb nationalist forces in Bosnia, of course, in Serbia proper as well. Just kind of want to pose the question to you directly. How can we move this region up on the agenda of American policymakers? Obviously, we know the administration has tremendous challenges ahead of itself, above all here in the United States, but we can't neglect this very important overseas theater. So how can we bump it up on the agenda, do you think, for American policymakers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it recognizes, your question recognizes, Dr., a reality, which is probably right now concern in Congress about what's happening in Bosnia and the Balkans generally is low. There's been a generational change, probably too, since the 90s. And there's not a crisis that people in Congress are aware of. The good fortune, frankly, is that there is a president, Joe Biden, who was deeply involved in these events that we've discussed today in Bosnia and the Balkans in the 90s. And he cares about it. He already spoke to his hope that there can be a resolution of the ongoing conflict between Serbia and Kosovo based on what he called mutual recognition. So, but I think we've got to, there is a moral element here, and it goes exactly to what President Biden has said about, really, he didn't always put it this way, but how his foreign policy would differ from that of the Trump administration. He wanted to stress alliances, relations with allies, and Bosnia is an ally of ours that we have a sense of shared values and interest with. The second is that President Biden has brought back to the center of American foreign policy promotion of democracy and human rights, and that also should bring us to want to stand with Bosnia in its desire to be in NATO and in the maintenance of their security. But the final point is pure geopolitical strategic interest, and those are important, which is Russia and China are two of the major international antagonists that we have today. I've talked about China. Putin's Russia is a unethical, sometimes immoral, aggressive, and extremely opportunistic power with a long-term interest in influence in the Balkans. And Putin's unabashed support of anti-democratic forces in the Balkans is a threat to everything President Biden has valued and to peace in the Balkans ultimately. So part of what we have to argue, who care about Bosnia and the future independence and freedom and prosperity of the Balkans, is that unlike Russia and China, we have no desire to dominate or exploit the Balkans. We want the Balkans to be free and independent and democratic. And we want Russia and China out. And I think that combination of both moral and ideological, but also practical security interests of the United States is what we all should be arguing to the president and the members of Congress to bring the Balkans back up as a priority area of our foreign policy. Because it's not as if we ignore it, it's going to get better. If we ignore it and stand passively aside, the Russians and the Chinese will just get more deeply involved, and the result will not be good for the people of the Balkans and not good for the people of the United States.
Thank you, Senator Lieberman. You can't hear it because my mic is muted, but I'm banging my desk in agreement over here with everything that you're saying. No, but I mean, I think really, if I may, the issue that you're focusing us on here is the United States as the indispensable country for the Western Balkans. And I think that's an attitude and a perspective that is widely shared, in particular in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but also Kosovo. The United States is the linchpin state in terms of these countries' existence and operation in the international arena. And that is something that once again needs to be harnessed and refresh that key central relationship. So thank you very much for your comments there, and again updating us in the context of everything that's going on right now with Russia, with China, and of course why this is a national security issue also for the United States, very importantly. And that also very nicely sets me up to what I think is going to be actually my last question, and I want to give Senator DeConcini the opportunity to provide us here with the last word as far as this round of questions is concerned. We've just talked about this notion of the centrality and the importance of the United States. But you're somebody who has a long history of, in particular, having worked on that transatlantic relationship, specifically that issue of trying to bring the European allies on board in the 90s to be more forceful, to be more present and engaged on the Bosnia issue. And this is, I think, realistically speaking, still an issue for the region. The United States historically has always been a little bit more forward-leaning in its ambitions and aspirations for the region, whereas some of our friends in the European Union have been a little bit more reserved as far as this is concerned. We have a Bosnia hawk in the Oval Office right now, of course, President Biden. Talk to us, if you can, Senator DeConcini. How can this administration work with its European allies to get a better deal for this region? And perhaps what do you again think it might be the role of the Bosnian community and the Bosnian American community in helping this administration bring the Europeans on side?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Senator Lieberman for laying that out, because he provided such a argument that I tried to mention a few times, but he put it in the terms of the importance of this for the security of Europe and the importance of our security too, our national security. And on this question, as I think I mentioned, to me, it takes constituency to bring about some change and to get members of Congress to press the Secretary of State and the White House to be involved. Now, as I said, President Biden's got a lot going on with everything in his first 104 days or 5 days, but he has been here before. He knows the issue. Secretary of State knows the issue. It's up to the Bosnia community, and I think those that can be moved to put some, hate to say the word, but put some pressure. And the Helsinki Commission ought to hold some hearings on it. And I think Christopher Smith is still deeply involved in that. And he was a very, very strong person when I was there, and that's a long time ago. So, this is what I think needs to be done. Politics, as Tip O'Neill used to say, is local. And we think about it on a national level, but it's local. And that means if my senators from Arizona, would write a letter, make a call, and Senator Lieberman's friends and constituents would make a call. And, something else that maybe Senator Lieberman would like to address, to organize, and I don't know quite how to do this other than through AIPAC and personal contacts, to get the American Jewish community and even the European Jewish community more committed to this. Not that they're not, but to get them to be more publicly committed to it, I think would have a great deal of influence. I would like to ask Senator Lieberman if he felt like responding to that, whether or not that's practical or doable, but I think that has still a great deal of weight. And it's just so important that we get NATO to move on this. And I think that, as Lieberman pointed out, after the last 4 years, it's a time that we're back, as President Biden says, but it takes a long time to heal some of those so-called abuses in the past presidency relating to NATO. It's just not going to happen overnight. But I wonder if Joe might comment on my reference to the Jewish community.
No, I think it's a natural and it's a good idea, Dennis, and I'd be glad to do what I can to help it. You know, people do move on, but this challenge in Balkans is very much real today, and there's a lot on the line.
Yeah.
And I think the Jewish community continues to have a feeling of kinship with the people of the Balkans and Bosnia particularly. So I'm happy to see if I can develop that idea of yours. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I didn't mean to place more burden on my friend. That's what they call passing the buck, I guess. I mean, if you want some help with Italian Americans, then maybe I can help you too.
Well, thank you very much, both. I mean, we need all the friends that we can get. But I think just to really highlight that last portion of the discussion, to both Senator DeConcini, of course, Senator Lieberman's points as well, that there is a special relationship, I think, certainly that's also seen and felt from the Bosnian side, from the Bosnian American side, with the Jewish community, with the Jewish American community. That is something I think there's a lot of appetite and interest to develop that relationship. And if I may be so bold, I think it's always good when a panel ends with some kind of working agenda for the future. I think that's a really, really good sign. I agree. There you go. So I'm so grateful to both of you for taking time out of your extremely busy schedules to speak on this issue. Thank you so much for reflecting on these very important events. And again, I really feel that it's so vital that we have these conversations, especially for our younger friends and colleagues. They need to hear these stories. And of course, above all, I want to thank our good friends here at the Bosnian Advocacy Center for giving us this time to speak together. And I wish both of you and your families and your colleagues the best of health in this trying time. I do hope to speak with you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Doctor. And I want to thank the Bosnia Advocacy Group and Ismail for putting this together. To me, it was really it was an honor to be part of it, but it's really worthwhile that we don't let this be forgotten. As Senator Lieberman has mentioned so many times, we can't just go on like this is going to happen. It's going to take some positive action. Thank you, Joe. Good to see you.
Thanks, Dennis. Good to see you. And thanks, Ismail and Dr. Miljanovic. It's been a great experience, honestly, to revisit this. And in the 24 years I was privileged to be in Congress, this experience that I had was really one of to me, the most important, ultimately satisfying. But, you know, you can't just walk away, nor can America walk away and look back and say, gee, we made something good happen. Something bad could happen unless we stay involved. So programs like this help to remind us. And you made a good point, Doctor. We need more than talk. We need action. Right. And we have an agenda that comes out of this discussion, which I believe we will pursue. Thank you very much. All the best to you and your families, too.
Same.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We're going to close off the stream. And thank you for your time again.